Okay, we're continuing with the book review here, The British Imagination by Peter Watson. And, you know, my father's from Ireland. I kind of get carried away a little bit with this history of England. I have a love-hate relationship with England. They did so many great things, but they also did so many evil things, especially the Irish, treated them like slaves. Here is the coronation ceremony for Queen Victoria. And she was queen from 1837 to 1901. And she was actually pretty good in terms of fulfilling her role as the monarch. She didn't do that much bad stuff. She could have done more, but anyways, beautiful painting, beautiful ceremony. You know, this is right before they started having black and white cameras available. Here is her family. You know, she loved Prince Albert. They had a lot of children. There's Queen Victoria, there's Prince Albert. And Prince Albert did some good things. He really helped out a lot with the Crystal Palace, the great exhibition in 1851 in Hyde Park to show off the industrial advancements and productivity of England, as well as Europe and the USA displayed in that. And that was a big cultural advance. So here's another big ceremony, the 50-year Golden Jubilee for Queen Victoria in 1887. You know, she was queen for 50 years by that time. Rather extraordinary. And she continued on for another, almost 15 years. So a long time for one person to be queen. And it is rather beautiful painting. Their churches are nice. They're not as nice as Catholic churches, but they're pretty nice. Here is some magnificent paintings. These are by Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood disciple. So the PRBs are the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhoods. They're the greatest artists in the history of England. And they came about in the mid-1800s, around 1850, with this desire to return to the more religiously devout painting style of the artists before Raphael. They felt that after Raphael, art had gone down the path of being too much emphasis on beauty, not enough emphasis on realism and religious devotion. And there was also a strong pullback in this time of Romanticism to chivalry. Chivalry, which looks back to medieval Christianity, King Arthur, the legends of King Arthur and whatnot, the Knights of the Round Table. It's magnificent, okay? So here's the Little Prince, here's the Call to Arms, and this guy Edmund Leighton's one of the all-time greatest painters. He's got tons of just magnificent, off-the-charts magnificent paintings. All right, here's another painting by Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. This one's by John Petit, The Vigil. But you get the drift. It's this devoted Christian romanticism. Again, romanticism looks back to medieval Christianity and emphasizes on the emotions, chivalry, versus neoclassicism means classic age, to look back to the ancient Greeks and Romans. Okay, now here is a painting by one of the leaders of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, the PRBs. This is by John Everett Millay, and this is Ophelia, of course, from Hamlet. Sad Ophelia drowned, all right? And John Ruskin, the great critic, really promoted the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. I'm giving you this overview of Victorian England so that when we start talking about more specific stuff about Victorian England, you'll have this background to put it all into perspective. Okay, now here's another great painting from the PRBs by William Holman Hunt. The light of the world is Christ, and he knocks on the door, but there's no handle on the outside door. You, as the person, have to answer. Do you want to try to imitate Christ, to have a good life, try to be nice? Oh, here's the great John Ruskin and his great speech, 1853 Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood speech. I'll try to remember to link it in the description below. It's the greatest art criticism speech of all time. It's magnificent. And, he was raised in sort of like a Presbyterian Calvinist type home. Well, what I would just say is a Bible thumping home. There was some of that Scottish Calvinist Bible thumping amongst his parents. Every day his mother had him memorize a passage from the Bible. The relevance being is when he wrote, man, could he write. He was a fantastic writer. I'll let you hear the speech for yourself. It's the best art criticism speech you'll ever hear in your life. Okay, now here is another influence on art. Here's Oscar Wilde, A Private View at the Royal Academy. But what you get a sense is just the love of art. Now, the love of art is unique to Western civilization. It's unique to Christianity. They love art galleries. I've collected art and studied art for many, many years, written several books about art and art history. there's tons of paintings like this where everybody's looking at the beautiful paintings. This one is especially unique because it's got Oscar Wilde. And Oscar Wilde was a little bit along that school of the art for art's sakes, with Potter and his group. But I loved Oscar Wilde because he was an Irish guy who went to England, despite the fact everybody hated him. He was the best playwright in all of England. And his play, The Importance of Being Earnest, is the best comedic play ever written. It's magnificent. It really is great. I think that's the best thing he ever wrote. I think it's much better than The Portrait of Dorian Gray or Lady Windermere's Fan. Okay, now here I want to show you is all that other stuff was kind of interesting and fun, but here's the harsh reality of life in the Victorian age. People had chimneys in their houses, and about twice a year they would need to have them cleaned, swept out. And a big guy like this, he can't get into that chimney, but they would send children in there. So the poor children, the boys, they were called the chimney sweep boys, they would send them into these chimneys to clean them out, and they had a very high death rate. Okay, they did not live long, these poor kids, and they had very high rates of cancer. So it's really sad. Child labor, there weren't child labor laws, and the poor people just were trying not to die of starvation. A woman who had no birth control, she'd have 10, 15 children. She'd often die in childbirth. Then you got all these orphan kids. And so the chimney sweeps had a rough life. Most of the people in Victorian England were poor. We all watch all the movies like Pride and Prejudice, Masterpiece Theater, and all this stuff. Read the Victorian novels about, the aristocrats. But most of the people are poor, doing some miserable, awful job like, being a coal miner, working in some filthy factory or something. Coal miners, inhaling all this coal dust, they would tend to die young, silicosis, pneumoconiosis, all this stuff. Coal miners' lung cancer. Okay, here actually I should have put this picture on the previous one. This is a chimney sweep. And what would happen to them is sometimes if their knees below their hip, they're probably safe. They get their knee above their hip, they would sometimes get stuck, and then they couldn't get their knee out of there, and they would die in the chimney. They'd be stuck, and they couldn't get them out. For the women, if a woman was lucky, she could get a job as a domestic servant. A poor woman who got a job as a domestic servant, she was lucky. This is Pamela by Samuel Richardson, one of the earliest novels. And this was a big emphasis on how she preserved her chastity despite the nobleman pursuing her. And then finally he married her. Okay, and here's a painting like from Hogarth's illustrations of just how sort of chaotic and drunk and all the bad habits and bad language of a lot of the poor people, because they lived a rough life. So they didn't have the privilege of having it so good as the aristocracy, the gentry, all right? And there's Pride and Prejudice too. So one of the biggest goals of a woman was if she could get married to a man with adequate wealth to support her, then she wouldn't have to work in a factory or be an old maid spinster, etc., etc. A lot of women worked as a seamstress in factories. This illustration, of course, comes from something different, but a lot of them worked as seamstresses in minimum wage jobs in the textile industry, and there was a tremendous amount of prostitution. The female prostitutes in the Victorian age were called priestesses of Venus. Hogarth has paintings of this as well. And here's a very famous courtesan lady. Her name was Catherine Walters. Her nickname was Skittles. Skittles has something to do with the old name for bowling alley. I'm not sure how she got that nickname, but she was famous for having a very narrow waist, for being great at riding horses, and she was a courtesan of the Victorian age who was mistress to the Prince of Wales. So here's another painting of her. I've seen other photographs of her, but here's the Prince of Wales. And the point I'm making is, if you're the Prince of Wales, a wealthy guy, you're riding horses in Hyde Park and chasing a foxy babe mistress, okay? Versus if you're some poor guy, man, you're working in a coal mine just trying to make a nickel so you don't starve to death, and maybe have a family so they don't starve to death. So it's certainly nice to have wealth. Money does matter. You can pay your bills and you can buy food for yourself, and you'll have a different life. So there's a lot more to life than money, but money does matter, and life's not fair, okay? A lot of people recognize how unfair it was. I previously showed a novel, I think in my yesterday's talk, from this review of Victorian history, the one by Gaskell about North and South poverty conditions. This one, of course, is by Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens was the greatest of the English writers. He's the best by far. Yeah, I know Thomas Hardy, and I like Thomas Hardy, but he's kind of depressing and overly negative and pessimistic. Charles Dickens at least gives you hope. Christmas Carol is the greatest novel ever written. The way Scrooge turned things around, and when Scrooge turned things around, it turned things around for everybody, for Bob Cratchit, for Tiny Tim. So here's another illustration of the cover. This guy, Roberto Innocenti, the Italian artist, he's a magnificent artist. This isn't his best work. I mean, his Pinocchio is his best illustrated novel, but his, Christmas Carol is pretty good too. He's a magnificent artist, that Roberto Innocenti. Here's one of the great movie versions of Scrooge with George C. Scott. He was great as Scrooge. There's the Ghost of Christmas Future. I really liked the Bill Murray one, Scrooge, too. I thought that was a lot of fun. The novel's real short. You could read it on a weekend. There's Charles Dickens in his study. Here's just a brief quote from Christmas Carol. "Spirit," he cried, tightly clutching at his robe, "hear me, I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been but for this intercourse. Why show me this thing if I am past all hope, his future grave? I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all year. I will live in the past, present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone." And Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. It's a beautiful story. Redemption. That's what Christianity is all about. Having a second chance and making the most of it. Redeem yourself, being reborn into living, try to live in the imitation of Christ. Be nice to people, help people, be the best you can be. Okay, here's, Tiny Tim lived, the son of Bob Cratchit. That was the accountant who worked for Scrooge in his sort of banking and loan firm. G.K. Chesterton quote, "The beauty and the real blessing of the book A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens does not lay in the mechanical plot of it, the repentance of Scrooge. It lays in the great happiness that glows through Scrooge and everything around him. Whether the Christmas visions would or would not convert Scrooge, they convert us." It's beautiful. And it's the conscience speaking to you. Okay, here's just another really great book. Dickens had a lot of great books, but David Copperfield, I think, is a great book to read to get a sense of what it was like to grow up poor in Victorian England. So at a young age, David Copperfield was born. This is the maid, Mrs. Peggotty, who took care of him and loved him. His own mother was a good lady, but she remarried an evil man who basically disowned him, disinherited him, brutalized him, sent him off to boarding school. At the boarding school, he had friends, but they would beat the crap out of the kids. The teachers were brutal. He later went with the Peggottys to visit some of their relatives in a little house by the beach that looked like a ship, and it was rather beautiful. But I'm telling you, if you want to get a sense of life in Victorian England, this is the book to read, David Copperfield. It's a very nice book. And it gives you a sense. It's a great classic Victorian novel. It's Charles Dickens' favorite novel because it's really autobiographical. I actually preferred A Christmas Carol and A Tale of Two Cities by him, and even Oliver Twist. But this is still really good. This gave me the biggest feel for that age. And he had been poor himself in childhood, Charles Dickens, so he understood. This is Mr. Micawber, who reminded him of Charles Dickens himself, his father. The book, like I said, is very autobiographical, and it's a great book. Okay, here's just some more covers. It's such a popular, best-selling book. These are some of the other covers. And here he is with the guy giving him a ride on the stagecoach, and this guy was pretty funny. He ended up marrying Mrs. Peggotty. And there's Uriah Heep, the crazy Uriah Heep. That's like Mr. Micawber in this version. Okay, and that's the end for today, and I hope that gave you a sense of life in the Victorian age. It was really difficult for most people, and it'll set the tone for the other things we're going to cover from the Victorian age in the upcoming lectures. I hope you found that helpful.